I'm Mara Keller. I'm Director of Women's Spirituality Program here at the California Institute of Integral Studies. We have an MA and Ph.D. specialization in women's spirituality, and we're very proud that we have an emphasis in archaeomythology founded on the work of Marija Gimbutas. Well, Marija was able to combine many different disciplines in order to construct a larger picture. And so it allows her to be multidimensional instead of very narrow or single dimensional in her work. It allowed her to see the larger picture. It's because she was a very conscientious scientist with the latest scientific methods that she used for her own archaeological digs. She knew the primary sources, the archaeological database, and all the artifacts, but she was curious about what is the spiritual significance of these artifacts. And to answer that question, she needed to draw on mythology, religious history, linguistic evidence, art history, to come up with the vision of the larger culture. She was moving into an area that's intangible and visible, the realm of faith, the realm of belief, the realm of spiritual experience, which no archaeologist can capture, and yet everyone agrees these ancient cultures were highly spiritual cultures. So she was very daring in asking those questions and trying to answer them. And so she discovered something that was very amazing to her, something very unexpected, that these people had so many goddess figurines as well as god figurines. They had peaceful developments. They were artistic, ceremonial, and seemed to have an enjoyment of life that she found remarkable, because she had been an expert in Indo-European studies where there were masses of weapons and warfare in the heroic age and so forth, and this was a very different civilization. To be more egalitarian, for women to be prominent, for a goddess to be preeminent, it was a startling discovery to see what she calls a goddess civilization at the roots of European cultural evolution. I think it's odd that people can't say, well, maybe it was true, maybe it wasn't, but let's look at the evidence. Instead, what we so often find is some kind of hostility to the even to the possibility of there being a reverence for a sacred feminine figure, or the possibility of egalitarian social relations between men and women, or class cooperation among the people. I mean, economic sharing, a communal basis. Why would people be hostile towards that? We can have an open question, is it true, isn't it true? But this vehemence that comes forward is quite surprising, I think, and then leads one to question, well, what are the values that are held by the researcher? Let's just have an open mind and look at the evidence. She's a brilliant woman. She's really a remarkable scholar. She's a genius, you know, to know all the languages that she knows, to have explored all the primary sources that she has researched, to have such a vast knowledge of her field, and then to develop a larger vision and theory of that. She's a genius. And I think time will prove that she's correct in her vision of the ancient civilization. I think one of the things that appeals so much to some of us is that we hope that many of those possibilities that she found in old Europe would be possible for us in the future as well. So what Marija found to be true of the old civilization, I desire for the future. I desire cooperation and peace and pleasure. I desire a future that's artistic, cooperative, communal, that's nature embedded and nature loving, that has respect for the sacredness of women as well as for men, of the plants and animals as well as for humans, that really enjoys ceremony and celebration and artistic creativity. So all of these things that seem to be true of the ancient culture, as discovered through Marija's work, I also feel are elements of culture that I dearly desire for the future. In contrast to various students of mine, for example, who read Marija's work, fall in love with it overnight, may even take the images to bed and dream with them, I, on the other hand, gradually came to appreciate Marija's work. I read her manuscripts very carefully. I read the 3 of her books in one summer. I researched her. I read her with a critical eye. I have very well-developed critical analytical training from my philosophical degree, and I was looking for what is the story, how does it hold together, does the evidence support her generalizations. I read her very critically to begin with, and I slowly began to appreciate the larger picture, the amassing of evidence that she had developed to support her inferences from the database, and then to come to finally, after several years of studying her and beginning to teach her, actually, to realize what a visionary she was, and that for her to have been able to see what she saw was so remarkable, to see the larger forest from all the trees. So I gradually grew in my appreciation of her extraordinary power of mind, but vision, to see that. Not many people would see what she sees. Yeah, actually I feel a lot of other people have seen a similar picture to what Marija has seen by looking at one piece in Crete, or looking at the details in Greece, or looking at the details in Çatalhöyük or Malta, and they look at one piece of the puzzle. But she had the synoptic vision, this great large-mindedness that really saw all of that together, and so was able to come up with the whole picture more clearly than anyone else had done. And again, she had primary access to the data, the hard evidence that archaeology provides, more directly than many of the other scholars who were using that information but didn't have the enormity of evidence that she was able to use, given her lifelong dedication to archaeology. So she was able to see more clearly than others. But there are many other people who have the notion of an early matristic culture. They called it the early mother times, or the early matriarchies, or they talked about the early fertility goddesses and the transition in the Bronze Age to the warrior clans in the heroic ages. People saw that, but they were never able to put it all together in the same way that Marija was able to do. I have a very strong commitment to learning the truth and speaking the truth as best I can. I think that's a mark of all good teachers, all good researchers. And so I'm very interested to see how does this theory or this interpretation of the evidence hold up to my own standards of knowledge or of truth. Do these look like goddesses? Do they look like individual women? Do they look like this is a stylization that travels through centuries and millennia within a particular culture? Does it travel cross-culturally? What is the power in a particular image that, that continues not just for one woman in one time, but continues through millennia? So this is the level of interpretation one can develop after they've looked at an enormous array of data. And we find that we call these goddess figurines because they have this stylization which continues across time and cultures, from the Paleolithic into the Neolithic and into the historical age. We also find that there's what you would call, and this is moving into a more intangible realm, a numinous quality. And yes, there's some subjectivity in coming up with this interpretation, but humans are a combination of subjective and objective reality, and our lineage as human beings goes all the way back for millennia and millions of years, actually. And so we feel there's genetic memory, there's cultural memory. There are different theories for explaining that. Jungian archetypes is one, genetic memory is another. Just cultural transmission through family lines. How do we develop as musicians or artists? It comes from our lineage. And so I feel that we can have some intuitive sense or some sense of connection through these rarefied but subtle and enormously wonderful sensibilities that we develop as human beings that allow us to have a feeling for the artifact. One of the reasons why Marija is such an outstanding role model for women today, and why I'm so delighted this film is going to be carrying forward her legacy, is that she did come up in her profession and succeed enormously well as a woman at a time in the 1950s and 60s and 70s when this was extraordinary for a woman to do. Actually, as you know, the women's movement came through in the late 60s. In the 70s, women were just beginning to come into their careers, but Marija had already succeeded as a world-class researcher of the Indo-Europeans by this time. She was able to move forward then from the success she had achieved into this new and controversial area. And she was fearless in doing that. So for many reasons, she's just a remarkable success story. But I think the main reason is that she's such a good role model for us is that she was able to learn the lessons of her experience. She was obviously, this touches me very deeply, so I'll have to start over again. But Marija was able to learn the lessons of her experience and to grow from them. She came through World War II, which was an extraordinarily difficult and horrendous period of adversity. She came to the United States as an immigrant. She went to Harvard as a person that they refused to ever pay for her research. She faced adversity time and time and time again, and was able to triumph every time against extreme odds. So it's remarkable that she had such perseverance, such strength of will, and strength of mind. But I think basically she had an indomitable spirit, which is what moves us so greatly, because someone who will just keep pursuing her goals and not give up, and then accomplish something so extraordinary. That's why she's such a wonderful role model for us, I believe. Yeah. Well, a story is about a sequence of experiences that a person had that has a tale or a moral value to be told, but it isn't necessarily larger than this individual or this group of individuals, whereas a myth speaks to the whole culture. And to borrow the understanding of Joseph Campbell, myth is the intersection of the divine with the human, in a story that makes it accessible to us as humans. And so if I need surgery, I'm going to have somebody who's well trained as a surgeon, for example, and not my dear neighbor to come in. So we're not all equal when it comes to practical purposes. So we set up certain hierarchies to accomplish goals, and we can do that cooperatively in a way that it benefits all the people involved. What is objectionable, again in the words of Rian Eisler, are the systems of domination or the hierarchies of domination that are used to benefit the few at the expense of the others. Well, it's fascinating to understand different cultures, ancient as well as modern. I think one of the remarkable things about Marija is that she was able to compare the mythology of old Europe with the mythology of the Indo-European culture that came after it. And so from a peaceful culture to a warrior culture, from an egalitarian culture to a male-dominant and class-stratified culture, from a goddess-oriented or goddess and God-oriented culture to a God-oriented culture, she was able to contrast those myths, and I think she was very aware, especially of what difference it made, what difference the myth made to the life in the community. And so if it's a warrior myth, And in my opinion, warrior myths have been predominant in Western civilization, certainly in the 20th century. We had the warrior myths leading us through World War II. We still have warrior mythology leading us off to war time and again. Those are myths that have a great deal of power. This is a countervailing myth that calls people to a more peaceful, egalitarian, sacred way of life. When I think of Marija Gimbutas, I think of a brilliant mind, an astonishing woman of great magnitude, great heart, great mind, and a visionary who was able to see deeply into the past in a way that was deeply beneficial for our future. One of the major discoveries of Marija's work is the bird goddess of the ancient Neolithic that comes down to us. This extraordinary figure of the uplifted figure that opens the heart, opens the lungs, lifts us up, soars into the heavens. The bird was the symbol of the soul in the ancient world. And so the bird goddess was one of the primary images of the goddess of the Neolithic. And this combined the female with the human female with other animal. The owl in particular was the harbinger of death, and it was seen to be wise because it understood that life comes to the end and life goes on. The owl is able to see through the darkness, and I suspect that the owl was considered wise because it understood the meaning of death. I think that may have been what its significance was. Major contributions that Marija made to understanding the religion of the peoples of old Europe was the attributes of the goddess were not simply those of a fertility goddess, but were those of birth and nurture, death and regeneration. So they're complex attributes that encompass the whole lifespan of humans and all of nature. So this was a great goddess, and the death and regeneration aspect of the goddess was very important, and she saw them paired so that they weren't separate as they've become for our own culture, where death is the end of life, and maybe we're resurrected into heaven, but or the afterlife. But for Marija, and the notion of the goddess of death and regeneration is that these came side by side, and that life goes on, and it goes on in this form of life as we know it on this earth, as well as perhaps in an afterlife. I mean, she didn't speak of an afterlife, but she did speak of the regeneration of life, and how one goes into the tomb, which then is the womb for the rebirth. The belief in rebirth is so important, and it was clear in old Europe, as it was in Crete, and came down to us in Greece and other cultures, finally entered the Christian culture, that in its own particular form, but the notion of being born to another life is so important for us. It gives us hope, and it also allows us to risk little deaths along the way so that we can let go and let things come to a natural death and then move on to something else. For me, the feminist legacy of Marija, primarily I would say, is that it enables you to love being a woman. Marija dearly loved womanliness. You can see it in the way she discusses the artifacts of old Europe. These are the goddesses, these are the breasts, these are the buttocks, these are the belly. She just almost adored the numinous quality of femaleness. And of course she also adored the masculine qualities, and she loved her relationships with men as well as her relationships with women. And she did appreciate an egalitarian culture that embraced both as sacred. So this legacy of hers is to understand the numinous quality of femaleness in relationship to the numinous quality of the male.